All right, well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Capital Area Tolling Authority meeting of, goodness, what is today? May 28th, 2025. Needed to check to make sure. And so to lead us off, Supervisor Kennedy, would you lead us off in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Second one today.
How about that?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's my second. All right, so moving on to public communications, is there anyone here that intends to speak on any items that are not on the agenda?
There's no public comment.
And there's no public comment. Very good. All right, so are any directors interested in disclosing any conflicts or any challenges with any of the items that are going to be taken up today? Seeing none, then we'll take up the consent
Chair
calendar.
Villegas, my apologies. We do have to take roll call here.
Very good. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Aceves?
Here.
Chapman?
Here.
Kennedy?
Here.
Vice Chair Early? Absent. Chair Villegas?
Here.
Ex officio members Click?
Here.
Deloria? Absent. Talamantes? Here. We have a quorum.
Very good. Thank you. Now we'll take up the consent, and I believe there's only one item on consent. Yeah, that's the minutes of the April 9th, 2025 meeting. Everybody's had the opportunity to look at those, read them, memorize them, and then we need a motion to approve them.
So moved.
Motion moved and second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are finished with the consent. Then we will move on to item number 2. That's an action item, and that is titled as Toll Pricing Structure and Account Management. And I believe, Sam, are you presenting it? Yep, you are. Okay. Floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, directors. Today we're going to be talking about our action item for toll pricing structure and account management as setting the table each time we talk about this, just to refresh on the process that these early months through September are going to be to discuss through a workshop setting on informational items, which we did on these items last meeting, and then take an action to decide the policy. We have that policy register, if you recall from last meeting, that we'll be pulling forward, and then memorializing that in the formal adoption of a resolution later this year. So this is today's action items. So you can see we are staying on track with the path that we laid out at the beginning of this year. We're going to start with a review of last meeting's workshop. I'm just going to briefly do some reminders on the content here, and then we'll go into what we heard from the last meeting, some of the tag discussion, and then the staff recommendation for policy action. If you recall, there's 2 different types of toll pricing structure options, one being the variable, which is the time of day. It's a set schedule that's usually developed in response to traffic patterns that are typically seen on a corridor, versus dynamic, which takes in real-time traffic information, calculates a price based on an algorithm. We've talked a little bit about the difference in those, being able to have the flexibility to respond to unanticipated congestion periods. And so you see some of those differences that we reviewed last time here. I'm happy to revisit any of this information if any directors would like clarification on the previously provided information.
Good.
Moving through to the pricing approach of per mile versus segment based. Per mile is really when the actual pavement that's used by a driver is the structure of the pricing that we use, versus segment based. In this situation, we'll do some comparisons so you can see the effectiveness of each one, and pull that forward as far as the different objectives that these types of approaches meet specifically for CARTA. And lastly, the fast track account management. This item is a formalization of our last discussion a few meetings ago about deciding to select an existing back office service provider within California versus procuring one specifically for CARTA. So we'll revisit that. Now, as far as information and analysis, so let's dive into a little bit of these. Oops, too fast. There we go. Okay, so some of the things we talked about last time. Variable. There is a predictability about it. So being able to publish a fare schedule online according to when different traffic patterns that are typically seen demand a certain price. The cons of that is, like I said, the non-recurring congestion. So anything that's an unanticipated event that creates congestion cannot be managed immediately. There's not a lot of active management capabilities at that time. Over time, of course, if trends are seen that the standard schedule is not managing congestion, those could be revisited and repopulated in the system. Versus dynamic, which takes some more upfront testing, some dialing in, if you will, on what price will manage demand to set that up and get that going before you go live. But it requires very little O&M responsibilities afterwards. It's not nothing. We do monitor to make sure that the algorithm is keeping up with the demand and that it's calibrated properly. But that's usually a system integrator process. So once we do the analysis, the system integrator is able to make those configuration changes pretty easily and pretty quickly. It is less predictable for customers. And I do have some information on some of those concerns that we heard about in the last meeting to bring back to you. We heard about customer messaging, this being potentially an equity issue of people really not having the understanding of what the price is going to be and how that drives decisions and choice of the type of trip of whether or not to use an express lane. We also heard about questions really about the effectiveness and the efficiency of both of those options, whether these pricing scenarios would work better or worse depending on weekday versus weekend. So we have a little bit of data that we'll be coming back to on that. And then we also had questions about regional consistency of how other operators are doing this, as well as whether or not this would work well for other corridors. So going beyond YOLO 80 and making sure that that regional context is brought into the decision-making here. So first I want to talk a little bit about customer messaging. You can see here, this does come up. There are times where we have, journalists or just, being able to talk about things in the press, being able to put on the website. When you have dynamic price and someone says, well, how much does it cost? It's not always an easy question to answer, but the answer isn't, I don't know. So we pulled some examples here of how agencies have typically messaged to customers. I can say that for the most part, people understand the idea of demand pricing. When there's more traffic, it costs more. And as I mentioned, there are over time as a corridor operates, we do see trends, but we also have the data to be able to report back. So let's say YOLO 80 is open and operating for 3 to 6 months. We will have the data to be able to say our lowest toll was this, our highest toll was this, and during peak times, you're looking at this range of a toll. So it's not nothing to be able to talk about the pricing in a dynamically priced scenario. Variable pricing, what you're seeing here is there is a system version of this. This is what gets loaded into the system that says, okay, I saw a car at this time at this day, and this is how much I'm going to charge. Agencies that do variable pricing do publish these rate schedules. This is also what you would go and recalibrate and reload into the system if your pricing was not managing demand effectively. Variable pricing can be useful also in closed access environments and full toll roads. And so when we talk about how this may interplay with segment-based pricing and open access, those are important factors to consider as well.
Director Chapman wants to know if we can convert those tables into T-shirts so he can memorize. the-
Absolutely.
Okay,
I'll
perfect.
put that on my action item list. Okay, so what this triage, the stoplight triage is showing is that the dynamic pricing, we do have that less convenient hurdle of customer messaging that I mentioned. But overall, the operational flexibility, we're giving green lights as far as being able to manage it as a function of the toll system, being able to have that operational flexibility during certain events, weekend activities, things that may arise. And that's really where you're getting your efficiency and performance, is because it is able to real time respond to demand. Now, similarly, with segment and per mile, the equity piece I mentioned, I think we can handle a lot of that through messaging. Segment-based pricing, the way I think about it is you're really handling a pain point on the corridor. And when you're a driver, when you think about your trip, drivers typically aren't watching mile markers and thinking, I'm going to go to this mile marker and pay this much. What's more transparent is how we sign and price for segments of saying, you're going to get off at Mace, and that trip to Mace is going to cost you $1.50. And so I think the importance of the tools that we have available, including on-facility signage for people to make that choice and understand how much they're paying, being able to message the idea of dynamic pricing, and that, yes, the price does increase with how much demand we have. And people really understanding that concept increases over time with the combination of segment-based and dynamic. When asked about the consistency in the Bay Area corridors, the full network is dynamically priced. And they do use a segment-based approach. And as I mentioned, these two things are in the basic concept of operations for the Bay Area Express Lanes network. And I think most people understand how much their trip's going to cost, using those immediate and then long-term destinations that are placed on the roadway.
Can I ask just a quick question on that?
Yeah.
In terms of the data that you referenced earlier, so obviously after the first 3, 6, 9 months, whatever that might be, to accumulate some of the data, is that when you would then make decisions around the segment-based pricing structure? I mean, how does that work? How do you, what are the metrics, or what's the data that'll be used to determine the segment-based pricing before you know kind of what those sweet spots or those distances are, or do you already know or have some sense of what those are?
I think what you're asking is how we know what the price is going to be based on the segments themselves. So there is somewhat of facility design there.
Well, but what are the distances that you're talking about? Like, what are the segments? How would you determine what a segment is? Is
Gotcha.
a segment from point A to point B, or how do you determine that?
Segments range between 2 to 4 miles, and they're usually designed to meet with the exits off a freeway. So you could have a segment that's from one access point, say at the beginning of the facility to the first exit. And then the second segment could be at from that exit to the following exit. I haven't looked at the plan sets closely enough to know how many. I think there's 2 segments on YOLO 81 in each direction.
Okay, so that's okay.
I'd have to ask the, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think YOLO 80 is a bit unique, right? Because there aren't interchanges in the middle. You're either driving across the whole causeway or you're not.
Right.
And so for that, we're really looking at potentially one segment in each direction. There's some option because especially approaching into Davis, there's 2 interchanges that you go through on the project when you're going eastbound. But I think the question is, we're not necessarily building this toll lane to serve people who are going from one half of Davis to the other half of Davis. They're probably not going to get in the toll lane,
Yeah,
right?
no,
Longer
and
distance.
that makes sense. And I guess I'm just, no disrespect to Caltrans. I know you guys had a subcontractor doing 80 work, but there was stretches where there were no exits in the entire city of West Sacramento. And as you can imagine, local elected officials, we got to hear a lot about that and what the public thought about it. And so I want to be mindful in asking the kinds of questions that will help distill and provide clarity around what those might look like and how do we determine what the segment sections are? But it might be a bit premature, but I just want to.
I think they were modeled as one.
It's not
though.
premature, and I think to clarify, so the entire Yolo 80 facility is open access, which means physically a car can get in and out of the toll lane anywhere they want to on this project. That's how it's designed. Segment-based pricing means if you choose to only drive halfway across the causeway and get out into the general purpose lane, we're gonna still charge you like you drove the whole causeway because we're trying to incentivize the full trip use of the lane.
Okay.
Any other
Sorry.
questions?
Nope.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Mm.
Wanted to revisit from the last talk, the idea of fast track account management. So with the decision to enter into an agreement with an existing back office service provider, what this policy action is formalizing that the account ownership is at the location that it's established. So if you use back office XYZ for customers to be able to sign up for fast track accounts, that account is held by that entity, not by CARTA. And so all that to say is that usually wherever you set up your account, that's where you would call for customer service, and that's where you would interface online for any kind of self-service. So this is a formalization of that decision to not have CARTA's own built or procured back office system. So the staff recommendations for adoption of the policies today would be to go with dynamic pricing, segment-based pricing, and the fast track account management provided by the back office that's contracted. I will say a few notes that I want to pull forward from the TAG meeting. I think there was largely concurrence for the dynamic pricing and segment-based pricing. And a few notes on the fast track account management side was that as CARTA staff goes through to identify which service providers may be willing and the best partner to be able to provide back office services and account management to CARTA customers, that the track record and the culture of really excellent customer service becomes important. And that the TAG felt it was also important to make sure that there's a process that's followed to thoroughly evaluate those things and diligently be able to select which partner is best to serve CARTA customers. With that, I will turn it, also Chair, you can take these as one action as we wrote in the staff report. And then if you prefer to take them separately, or we need to move one policy forward but not others, then that's up to the board. I'll turn it back to you.
Very good. Thank you for that. So we'll take any initial questions and then we'll see if there's any public comment. Are there any initial questions? Any directors?
Can we go back one slide?
Nothing with the main one around the adopting dynamic segment and fast track account management. This second one, staff recommending board direct staff to establish min-max tolls in the business rules. Can we just talk about that a little bit more? Are these meant to be soft caps or hard caps or what?
Yes, sorry, Director Click, I didn't mean to gloss over that. Yes, so a minimum could be a hard policy. Maximums, we typically recommend to be soft caps that are within the business rules so that we have the operational flexibility. That varies authority to authority, so we could take direction on that, but the recommendation is that it's in the business rules level.
So just as a thought exercise, you have non-recurring congestion, you have a major accident or something, or not something that's so major that you're going to open the lanes to everyone, but you're going to really elevate the toll rate above what it typically to deal with this non-recurring congestion situation. If that exceeded this soft cap in the business rule, the system would be able to do that.
Yes, usually how it works is the soft cap is programmed as a system configuration, and then it would take an operator override to say like, yes, go
Okay.
higher, be able to manage that situation.
Thank you.
And so said differently, the system can't automatically set the price over a certain amount, but a human who has rules and policies can override if the given conditions on the ground justify putting the toll above the soft cap.
Very good. Thank you for that. So we'll take any initial questions and then we'll see if there's any public comment. Are there any initial questions? Any directors?
Nothing with the main one around the adopting dynamic segment and fast track account management. This second one, staff recommending board direct staff to establish min-max tolls in the business rules. Can we just talk about that a little bit more? Are these meant to be soft caps or hard caps or what?
Mm.
Yes, sorry, Director Click, I didn't mean to gloss over that.
And just for clarity, and my concern would just be, yeah, establishing any sort of max or cap on the toll rate in the business rules or anywhere else, because
Yep.
that is something, it will have the ability over time to erode the system's ability to manage to a certain level of congestion.
And to change that, they would have to come back.
You're right.
Or, yeah, we don't want to, I agree.
I'm good.
We good?
Yes, ma'am.
For the fast track account management, I know you just mentioned like kindness and good customer service being at the forefront of how we want to be as an organization. And this is probably a question for down the road, but like, will fast track have to hire more people? And if so, how many more people? And can they be Sacramento based? So that when people are answering the calls or, you know, responding to customer inquiries, like it's different when you drive by something, see something, and then you're the person responding to other people's concerns, as opposed to like someone that lives in the Bay Area that has zero idea about what Sacramento looks like, feels like, especially during this first few months as we're, you know, bringing this in and doing all the education pieces. I don't know if that's something that we can work out in next steps, but just something food for thought. So.
I can respond just to, how the typical practice is that the vendors that bring customer service and call centers up are very skilled and seasoned at being able to train customer service reps to feel local even when they're not. So there's a really robust training program. So if you call, and especially if you think about the displacement of call centers during the pandemic, for example, that we look at things like, and this could be part of the evaluation, where you look at things like training materials, people understanding to make sure that all of that local flavor is there, especially when it comes to specific trips on the corridor and things of that nature. So physically local versus feeling local could be two different things, but it's something that we would pull into the evaluation of a back office service provider to make sure that they had a robust training program for their CSRs to be able to offer that service.
Yeah, I guess for me, actually living in Sacramento would be important. And something that if we can like place as priority, it's just, you know the neighborhood and you feel it and you say you're gonna go somewhere and it's all red and you're like, okay, got it. So I don't know, being a part of the community as we transition is important to me. So, thank you.
Okay, so those are all the questions at the moment. We'll check with Robert, see if there's any slips to speak on this item.
There's no public comment on this item.
And I see nobody coming up, so that, take that as a no. Bring it back to the directors for further discussion, further questions or a motion. Yes, sir.
Back to the back off, sorry. To the back office, the whole, who we're gonna pick, which by the way, this makes a lot of sense. And the type of customer service that we're gonna get from them, just for our long-term situational awareness. Once that's chosen, we'll do the best due diligence on that, but once that vendor is chosen, are we joined at the hip with that vendor can we at some time in the future either create our own or switch vendors? How does that work?
Absolutely. It's not a forever decision. I think that being able to, leverage, to steal Kathleen saying, standing on the shoulders of giants, people have done this before and have processes that are set up is definitely an asset. But long-term, let's say that you wanted to procure your own and
Right.
have yes, absolutely. That would be a migration from one customer service center to another. And right now it's envisioned to be a partnership with another public agency that has a third party providing that service. So that would just be you going and getting your own third party is what that would look like.
Yeah, no, I think, and the reason I'm asking is getting a little bit into the weeds is the infrastructure in the field that's actually doing the data collection. And that's part of I believe the integrator, toll integrator. How does that piece connect to this and will that be affected? Should we switch vendors in the future? Because I like keeping the options open for obvious reasons, whatever. They don't provide the customer service we want, or we find frankly a better deal, what have you. We need to be good stewards of this organization. So I just want to make sure that we understand, or at least as best as we can, what the implications would be for the whole infrastructure should we need to switch. Thinking not much, but again, that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember the diagram that I had where you had the two pieces going in parallel and then connecting.
Mhm.
roadside procurement that Yolo's team is working on right now is that lane side stuff. It's all the things that are in the field with the hardware saying, I see a car, I see a tag, and it's packaging up and sending that somewhere. Right now, the plan is for them to send that to the chosen back office provider that already exists in California. If you had wanted to go procure your own at some point, it basically is pointing that system to send it somewhere else. And so those are two separate contracts.
Okay, thank you.
And as you can imagine, the toll system integrator contractors, the folks who are going to put the stuff in the field and package those trips, have had and not had contracts with other tolling authorities and have worked and not worked with back offices. So there's a lot of flexibility in the vendors and with the back offices to like make the two pieces fit together down the line as CARTA
We'll move
evolves.
to one other area. If you don't- okay,
Yeah.
very good. Thank you, Kathleen. Yep, that's all.
All right. Good. Anybody else? Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, I think Director Talamantes' question earlier, or comments earlier around making sure that we are tracking kind of the essence of how the customer service is working and whatever we embed, whether there's surveys or whatever that back office requires to ensure that we are getting kind of real-time sense of kind of how well it's working for the public is important. So. All right, then we have a staff recommendation that was up there. It's in front of you, but any thoughts, comments, or motions to move this item forward?
Move to approve staff recommendation.
All right, so Director Kennedy has moved all three items, I'm assuming.
Mhm.
And we're looking for a second by Director Aceves. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So very good. Thank you very much. That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
All right. Yep, good work. Thank you. Okay, item 3 is the next item, and that's the final fiscal year 25-26 budget and 5-year budget forecast. Kathleen Aziz.
True, I know I got to get my name tag updated
Ah,
here.
well done. Yes.
It's the same great planner. Thank you, Chair Villegas. Okay, so item 3 is an action item before you. So officially what the staff recommendation is just on the 1-year budget for fiscal year 25-26. But of course, it's really hard for us to have a conversation about the next 1 year of CARTA without thinking about the next 5 years and really getting us into YOLO 80 operations. So your staff's folded those two things together with everything you need to approve the budget for next year, and then having the kind of bigger conversation on what CARTA's finances are looking like. So I'll do a brief recap of the fiscal year 25-26 revenues and expenditures. As a note, these were on information as a draft for you last month, and there have been no changes since last month. So if you did a real deep review last month, feel free. I'll try to keep it brief here for you today. And then we'll dive in more detail into the 5-year budget forecast, which is really the new information, and really focusing on expenses and funding and the two colors of money that both of those things are coming in for CARTA. There's a lot of conversations around expenses and contracts and toll revenue that we're going to need to have for CARTA looking out over these 5 years. And we're not trying to bite all of that off today. So it's really just thinking about these startup costs that CARTA needs, what kind of money we need for those startup costs, and sort of what the funding strategy is to try to get that done. Okay, so just as a reminder, for fiscal year 25-26, we have a balanced budget of $1.868 million. The revenues come from about $570,000 in carryover from this fiscal year of that original loan from SACOG. And then SACOG has also offered to make a second loan of $1.3 million. So that'll be the additional revenues for this year. The staff recommendation and the attachments include an amended loan agreement and promissory note with SACOG to formalize all of this action with the approval of the budget. Both of those have already been reviewed and approved by the SACOG committees and board last month. So this approval by CARTA today will finalize those for execution. Then on the expense side, you have more details in your attachment, which I believe is attachment 3B. But we have in the $1.8 million of expenses, about 2/3 of that are related directly to the toll program, and about 1/3 is administrative. That includes financing and some loan origination costs that we're anticipating for CARTA to fill its funding gap, as well as clerk, administrative, invoice processing, all that good stuff that SACOG will continue to do for CARTA. In major changes between 2024-25, the year we're currently in, and looking ahead to next year, the real reductions are right-sizing the legal budgets. We didn't really know what to expect CARTA's legal expenses to be in its first years. We have a better sense now, so we've fixed those a bit. We've also moved public outreach from a staff-supported line item to being part of the larger consultant contract. We weren't able to make as much progress as we would like to from a capacity perspective on public outreach this year. And so moving that to the consultant contract just means we're going to be able to get it done. And then also the reduction reflects the transition of SACOG staff consistent with the board action you took back in February to say SACOG transportation is going to transition out, the consultant's going to come in, and we're going to hire an executive director. And so those costs change over the course of next fiscal year consistent with that board direction. On the increases side, we have increases costs for executive recruiter and a professional organization, the International Bridge Tunnel Turnpike Association, something like that, is CARTA's new band it's a part of. And so we really want to start engaging with those, particularly to recruit a great executive director for this region. And so folding those costs into the budget helps us do that. As I mentioned, there's some loan origination fees in the financing and financial planning. We'll get to this down the line, but we anticipate CARTA is going to need to go after a California Infrastructure Bank or iBank loan to cover some of its startup costs. They require an origination fee, so we folded that into this first year budget so we can hopefully execute that loan this fiscal year. And then there's a larger consultant contract than in last year because SACOG transportation staff are transitioning out. You need more consultant resources to provide the same level of service. Okay, any quick questions on the 1-year budget before I keep us rolling to the main event of the 5-year budget forecast?
Seeing none.
Okay, great. So looking at the 5-year budget forecast, I'm going to orient you a little to what you're looking at here because there's a lot of information. So right, you have 5 years in columns and then a total on the far right here. So the first column, the next fiscal year that CARTA is heading in is really, you can think of this as a procurement and a contracts year. This is CARTA purchasing all the things, getting all the partners in place, making those initial payments to really be able to, in fiscal years 27 and 28, construct the roadside toll system, test the relationship between the back office and the toll system that we were just talking about, and really prepare all for go live in summer of 2028. So kind of at the end of that fiscal year 27, 28 year. So this is a very intense period. You'll see costs are a lot higher in this year because we're executing, constructing, deploying things on the ground. Then fiscal year 2029 and fiscal year 2030 are really when YOLO 80 is in operations. So there's a bit of a ramp up in fiscal year 28, 29, and then kind of a settle down. So you can get a sense, I mean, all this is a bit of a crystal ball, right? But you can get a sense of kind of what the steady state of CARTA we can expect the steady state of CARTA to be when just YOLO 80 is in operations until we start to have new corridors come online. So just orienting you to what you're looking at in attachment 3E. On the expenses side, we've divided them into 2 categories, capitalizable and non-capitalizable. Capitalizable meaning the kinds of costs that you can use traditional transportation capital money for, things that are for building the transportation part of this project. So conversely, non-capitalizable expenses are like the overhead admin types of costs that you can't usually use traditional types of transportation funding for. And so when we're thinking about CARTA's startup funding gap, we really need to think about its 2 gaps, right? It's gap for non-capitalizable costs and it's gap for capitalizable costs because we can use different strategies to fund those 2 different pots. On the non-capitalizable expense side, we've divided it into 2 subcategories, administrative, which covers SACOG's administrative staff costs, the executive director, part of the executive director's salary related to administrative work they'll do. Legal, insurance, audits, travel, software, all that good stuff. The outreach and communications pieces are loaded in here. The recruiter to bring on that executive director, particularly in this first fiscal year. And then loan interest, repayment, and fees. Most of the loans we're looking at don't let you use loans to pay loans. So we need to have another source to make those initial payments until toll revenue comes in, and we can pay it with that. On the program and management and policy side, so this is SACOG executive director and consultant staff costs doing a lot of the work you see coming before you in staff reports, right? The policy issues, managing the contracts, like some of the things that aren't about the construction of YOLO 80, but are still transportation applied. There's also an assumption in this 5-year budget forecast that CARTA is going to win the Caltrans planning grant that it applied for to do a regional equity study. I should find out in July or August what the results of that are, and we'll give you an update as soon as we know. On the capitalizable expenses side, there are two categories: the roadside system and the back office and customer service center. Just as a reminder, the roadside system is both the equipment that you attach to the signs on the roads that read the license plates and the toll tags in your window. And it is also the services that that contractor provides, processing that information, applying a price to it, packaging that all up into a trip and sending it off to your back office to be billed. All of that is one big contract. And so this expense category includes that big contract, as well as consultant resources to oversee that contract, make sure they're meeting the performance indicators, making sure they're delivering the reliability that you all want them to do, both on the executive director and the consultant side. We've also folded a contingency in here. Buying things is very irregular right now, and we're gonna have to buy some equipment here. So I wanna make sure that we have a contingency in there to help support CARTA's successful delivery. On the back office system and customer service center, this is right on the policy discussion we had on item 2, that relationship that we're gonna have with another tolling authority government agency in California, where they're gonna process our transactions for us. So there is a like startup construction cost to that, because that agency we partner with is going to need to issue a change order with their contractor for them to have more people answering the phones and more capacity to be able to process our initial transactions. And those costs are going to occur prior to construction. We have to be ready to, prior to toll revenue service. We have to be ready to go when YOLO 80 opens. They have to have all the people necessary. So there are kind of pre-costs to that. And then the ongoing operations costs once we're collecting tolls on YOLO 80. There's also, just like in the previous one, executive director and consultant costs overseeing all of that, right? Somebody has to negotiate those agreements and look at those reports and make sure everything's happening as it should. On the revenue side, so similar to how we categorized expenses into capitalizable and non-capitalizable, we categorize revenue into non-transportation / flexible, things that can fund the non-capitalizable type costs, and transportation restricted, which can only fund capitalizable type costs. So in the non-transportation flexible revenue category, we have the 2 initial loans from SACOG totaling $2.6 million. And then we have a line that shows the demand, what CARTA needs as a loan from either a member of CARTA or a local agency along the corridor to loan to CARTA to be repaid back with future toll revenue to cover those costs. So to give you all a sense of the order of magnitude of what that ask is in our region. Now, this 5-year budget forecast that we've put before you is what we think is a smart business case for CARTA. It includes a higher level of public outreach to get the toll tag penetration you all have directed us to go for. It includes an equity program, right? It's doing all the right things for CARTA. I think there are some cost efficiencies that we could find in this 5-year budget forecast, depending on how that loan from member local agency number comes out here. You'll also notice on the non-transportation flexible revenue side, there's a line for toll revenue, but it's empty. We're still working through the traffic and revenue forecast with YOLO TD. I didn't want to put any numbers in front of you for you all and anyone else to get attached to. And first thing back in August, we'll be having that conversation. So you'll notice the later years show a negative. That's just because there's no toll revenue when YOLO 80 is in operations. We anticipate that YOLO 80 will be able to cover its costs. On the transportation restricted side, there's a combo line item with funding from the YOLO 80 project budget and a loan from the California Infrastructure Bank. You'll recall that YOLO 80 was funded with grant money, both from the state and the federal government. And CARTA staff have been working with Caltrans staff to understand what amount of that project budget is available to support these construction and startup costs that CARTA is delivering on behalf of the team for the YOLO 80 project. And we're still not sure how much funding is able to come from YOLO 80. There's a lot of things in play, but that has a direct impact on how big of a loan we have to take from the California Infrastructure Bank. So those two are like 2 sides of the same coin. The more money we get from the YOLO 80 project budget, the lower of a loan we have to take from the California Infrastructure Bank. The less from the project, the bigger loan we have to take. Of course, project budget is grants. There's no interest on that. We don't have to make any repayment. So the bigger reliance this agency has on that California Infrastructure Bank loan is going to drive up the payments it needs to make, even pre-toll operations, right? That's when we're going to start to have a cash flow squeeze. in that year leading up to YOLO 80 opening. And then there's the Caltrans planning grant, which would fund the equity study. So if we don't get the grant, it won't be there. I know this was a lot. I'm happy to go back and dig into anything, but just want to clarify that the larger 5-year budget forecast conversation, looking forward to digging in, but the staff recommendation and the action is really for the 1-year budget. So staff are recommending approval of that 1-year fiscal year 2025-26 budget, authorizing the chair to execute an additional $1.3 million loan with SACOG, which includes the loan agreement, the promissory note, and then there's also an administrative services agreement with SACOG. As you all know, SACOG has been staffing CARTA, and CARTA has been paying SACOG for that. However, we haven't had an agreement. So now we're going to have an administrative services agreement to sort of formalize that relationship between CARTA and SACOG. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Chair, for questions.
Very good. Thank you, Kathleen. All right. Any initial questions before we ask for any public comment? Seeing none, Robert, any slips to speak?
There's no public comment on this item.
No public comment at all. Wow, that's a lot of information. Thank you, Kathleen. So we'll bring it back for further discussion or direction for the fiscal year 25-26 recommendation.
I'll just make a comment. I agree with the staff recommendation, and I just want to reiterate what Kathleen said. There's costs in here that, well, we can legitimately, obviously, capitalize for the project to pay and fund. We're absolutely moving and leaning forward on that to make sure that we can make those costs that are capitalized. Obviously, the other ones that we can't, that are truly operational related, post-construction, those are the ones that would have to be obviously part of this whole loan packaging. I will say that, correct me if I'm wrong, Kathleen, but if I look at the construction and testing slide on the 5-year budget forecast, some of those costs shown in there on the expenditure side would be from the project, right?
Yes, so we believe all of these capitalizable costs can be attributable to the YOLO 80 project prior to starting revenue service, right? Once we're in operations and construction on the project is done, that's obviously no longer a construction cost. But looking in fiscal year 26, 27, 27, 28, but we really need to understand all the pieces of the puzzle, right? There's CARTA's need, there's what the project budget has to offer, there's other options. And so we were continuing to have those conversations at the staff level.
No, and I appreciate, and I was really just focusing in on the big numbers of the roadside system. That one, a lot of that, obviously operations of it, that's one thing, but the actual building of that will be part of the project cost. Yeah, thanks, that's all.
So that roughly 26 million comes out of the state and federal grant dollars that Caltrans has.
We're still working with Caltrans to understand what the picture of their project budget is and how much of that money can be covered with the project budget. So we're not sure what amount, but all of that is eligible to be covered with those costs.
Okay, and I'll just jump into it, is we're looking into that, but Kathleen is absolutely right. There's things that are, you start getting into the toll integrator and things that are more on the operation side, so we just have to be careful with that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. And then just one last question. You mentioned that the member agency loan in 26 or 27, 28, that funding gap. And you said along the corridor. Does it have to be at jurisdictions that are on the corridor, like our dear friends in Sacramento County or in the city of Sacramento, if they wanted to donate or loan cash, they could too? Or why is it only people on the corridor?
So
yeah.
CARTA, I can start, then maybe James can chime in. CARTA staff have approached all of the members of CARTA, voting and non, to see what capacity they have to loan money to CARTA. And just as a reminder, this is not a gift. This is a loan. You can collect interest on it. We've got good toll money coming in. If anyone's just learning about this for the first time, it's a smoking hot deal. But so far, only SACOG has been able to offer these additional loans for those first 2 years. And so CARTA staff have expanded our sales pool over to the jurisdictions that are along the corridor, the cities of Davis and West Sacramento and Yolo County. There's no reason why other jurisdiction partners can't provide, but what we heard from some of the regional partners from other counties, that it's just a bit of a tougher sell to explain what the benefit is of supporting a project that's getting delivered in another county. Whereas if you're improving traffic in your community, it's a bit of a more one-to-one for folks to be able to make the case.
And I just add on by saying the history was just made. That's the biggest laugh line any toll authority has had in the state of California. You've heard it here first. Yeah, I don't think we obviously want to exclude any partner agencies. I mean, as honestly, as very seriously as Kathleen is saying, right? I think what we have done is to start with the agencies that, yeah, this is a, if you're parking money and gaining interest, why not park it here? Which then comes back to the region, right? Multiple times over.
Yeah.
We've started with the partner agencies on the corridor. Obviously, those that are the member agencies of CARTA, but as you know, Director Chapman, the cities on the corridor in Yolo County. We are absolutely thinking about other counties as they come in, as CARTA is set up with projects and advance through an EIR phase, where a managed lane and a toll lane is a preferred, locally preferred alternative. That is a very good time at which we want to try to have sort of, some financial participation, right? Even in the form of a loan. But we would absolutely not say no to any of that. And I just want to put the finer point on what Kathleen said earlier. As you all have discussed before, the more of the roadside cost, the back office and everything that we just showed is up there as capitalizable that can come out of the project, the less the iBank loan will be. The less the iBank loan will be, the less we are going to actually have to ask through the partners to loan the startup costs for CARTA, the quicker you might get your money repaid, right? So that's, stay tuned. But that's what we're really working hard to try to secure.
All right, remember, you heard it first here, smoking hot deal, right? Is that the tagline? That's our marketing. So, Robert, you said there were no slips to speak?
There's no public comment of this item.
Okay. All right, so we have the report and the recommendation before us.
I'll move staff recommendation.
We have a motion and a second by Commissioner Kennedy. All right, very good. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries unanimously as well. Thank you very much. That's great work, you guys. Thank you, Kathleen. All right, so then that takes us to item 4, I believe it is, and that is an informational workshop, toll pricing and discounts policy workshop. That's back to you, Sam.
Thank you. Focus on toll discounts and exemptions. And this is really going to be, as I said, it is informational. But as with all of the informational workshops, we encourage discussion and questions and any thoughts or concerns that you have, so we can gather that up and make sure that we can synthesize that when we come back next month. You'll notice on this one, these two policies, oops, sorry, hold on. Oh, I got it, Robert. You'll notice that we've split these toll exemptions in coming back to you in June for action, whereas toll discounts coming back to you in August. And I'll discuss that in more detail in a moment. So we have two buckets of discounts and exemptions. There's the types that are really legally required by California Vehicle Code, or those that are just typically exempt in your peer agencies. And then there are those for consideration. And as we go through these, you'll want to think about the impacts of these. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the outcome of these types of decisions as we discuss them today, and really establish kind of a shared vocabulary about what these different discounts are, but also what they look like in operations. Specifically, how they impact revenue generation, how they manage congestion or not, and what costs are actually incurred, both direct and indirect, in being able to administer and carry out discounts and exemptions for that matter. So as an example here, we have direct costs. This is where if we give a discount, an in-lane discount of a toll, that's foregone toll revenue. And so being able to understand the price for a trip in the lane and then discounting it is making the value of that benefit look a little bit different. Indirect costs would include the actual mechanics of being able to run a program, whether that's people that are processing eligibility of people who would be eligible for a discount, what a toll system may need to do to recognize a type of vehicle or trip as being eligible for a discount. And I want to really underscore the indirect costs that come with public messaging. We know from a lot of use cases throughout the US that the more complicated your policy is, which usually happens, it comes from a good place of people trying to identify those fringe cases and do the right thing. But every element of that that becomes more complicated has a cost in messaging, because if people don't understand the policy, they can't use it. And it just costs a lot of money to be able to have people really understand and appreciate what you're trying to do for them. So we try and keep policy pretty simple and straightforward. And then, of course, operationally, again, I'll pick on in-lane discounts, because not being able to price certain vehicles out of the lane does have a direct operational impact. We see that with clean air vehicles. Vehicles that are not paying anything have no incentive to get out of the lane. And so hopefully that will be resolved before YOLO 80 comes online, but clean air vehicles is a great use case for showing what happens when you give a 100% discount to certain vehicle types. Now, I mentioned the 2 buckets, and so here are some examples. And again, we're really just going to try and set some vocabulary and talk about these at a high level today. And so feel free to ask all the questions you want about these. For the ones, I'm going to start on the right side, the ones that are usually exempt: registered van pools, public transit vehicles, paratransit. You'll enter into an agreement with CHP at some point to patrol your express lanes. If they are in the lanes, they'll typically be exempt. Maintenance vehicles that are working on the express lanes themselves, typically exempt. Those could be Caltrans vehicles working on the lane. That could be your system integrators, maintenance truck in the lane. And since you're reimbursing those costs, we would typically get a way to exempt those vehicles. And then the ones that are legally required, so emergency vehicles responding to an incident, are in the statute, the California Vehicle Code, as being required to be exempt. Versus the one on the left, which is really what's up eventually for consideration. Any kind of HOV discounts, any kind of low income or equity-based discounts. Motorcycles can be considered. I'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. There are frequent driver discounts in some programs, as well as veteran discounts. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these individually. So occupancy-based discounts, just some context when we think about charging based on how many people are in a vehicle and what it takes to be able to see people in a vehicle and verify people in a vehicle. And it's very public knowledge that this is a real challenge nationally, as well as specifically in California and Washington State and a number of other ones, that right now the concept that's used is self-declaration. And we've learned that people aren't very honest when you can get 100% discount. And so, based on the program, we see anywhere from 30 to 50% of misdeclared occupancy. That is to say that we should really be thoughtful in considering whether or not replicating certain concepts is a great idea, and what we can pull forward in some other opportunities to see that that does not have a detrimental effect, not just on revenue, but on fairness, on the people that are being honest, and on lane performance, because nothing beats a free ride. Low income discounts. Oh, go ahead.
That number, 30 to 40%?
30 to 50% depending. So there's a few public studies and there's a few anecdotal ones that we see as, to be able to measure these, Director Talamentes, you have to actually visually check. So there's been studies where people actually go and sit and watch the beacons fire, and if you drive down 880 or a number of other lanes, you'll see, you can see it firsthand. Maybe not derive the percentage, but that it is a problem. Are we good on that one?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't. feel free to stop me. Okay, low income discount. So some examples of equity-based discounts. They can come in the form of discounts as well. So you could chop a toll in half for people that qualify. You can also provide a subsidy, just a cash payout. We have a choice-based program that is in San Mateo, for example, where they are allowed to use that money for either transit or tolls. And these do come with, as I mentioned, costs. So you have to be able to find the people. They have to want and need it and understand it. You have to enroll them. There's usually an income verification check. And then you have to stay sticky with them to make sure they're getting their benefit and they know how to use it. So these programs do have an administrative cost, depending on how they're executed, that is at least in the 7 to 10% territory of it. So we try and think about that really thoughtfully, because ideally your equity program would have most of the benefits going to the direct benefits. So there's a lot to weigh in there when you make those decisions. Motorcycles. Specifically because California still allows lane splitting, motorcycles are really tricky. They're also very tricky for our toll systems to be able to see and identify and have performance metrics associated with that functionality. And so being able to know what to do with motorcycles is something that we need to be deliberate about and make sure that it's very clear messaging to them in an open access environment of how to use the lane for a fee or not. Frequent driver discounts. There are a handful of frequent driver discounts. The one in Florida actually just retired. They had a bunch of COVID dollars and the governor wanted to ease the burden on a few folks, and they were doing a capped monthly. OCTA and TCA also have them. I will say that typically we see these with toll roads that are fully tolled that are in competition for other ones. So it's a draw to get those customers to use those facilities with some sort of monthly package, right? When we're talking about express lanes and demand-based congestion management, the idea of a cap can kind of compete with your message, because you're basically saying if you use it at least this much, feel free, go nuts and use it as much as you want for the rest of the month. So that's something to think about in your objectives and your general philosophical approach to that kind of message. And then lastly, the veterans discounts. There are a few states that have veterans discounts. These are usually identified through specific types of license plates for enrollments that have really specific eligibility requirements. So they do have that administrative cost and art to signing those people up. Here in California, there's already a program, but it is only eligible on the bridges. However, express lane operators can choose to honor those discounts. And so that's something that we'll be coming back to you with. I mentioned the toll exemptions. You see those here. Transit buses, I'll say that the commute bus does have a specific definition. There's a reason that Apple buses are the over-the-road type with the luggage underneath, because that's the kind of vehicle that you have to be eligible. They couldn't get a Sprinter van, or not a Sprinter van, but they couldn't get another type of bus and say that we're public transit, right? So that's specifically transit vehicles as well as those specific types of buses, paratransit. Registered van pools, these are ones where we want to be able to identify those and identify them ideally with a toll tag, so that they can be in our lanes and not have a huge operational burden. And then we don't really see a lot of CHP express lane patrols in the actual lane. They're usually getting in the lane when they do a pullover, so that's not a huge operational burden, but it is something that we would obviously honor as a partner of enforcement, and same with maintenance vehicles. I burned all my talking points up on this slide already. You can come back if we have any questions. HOV discounts, this is our little regional peer agency map that we like to use. So you can see here that the ones that are HOV 2+ circled in the orange color. The tiered discounts, HOV 2 versus HOV 3+. So that's where you're starting to see a number of facilities in the US have started to have to consider HOV 3+, because HOV 2 wasn't enough. It was degrading the lane as a free. And once they're free, like I said, you can't price them out of the lanes. So this becomes kind of a tiered discount situation. And then some moving to just, you have to have 3+ to be able to get any kind of discount at all. So 2+ is just put into the category as 3+ in that blue border. Here's an example of the HOV discounts in the Bay Area. You can see corridor to corridor where people get half-price tolls versus being able to drive for free. I'll say that to some extent, some of these limitations are from, it's not that there's not a need for HOV 3+. Some of these are legacy systems, and to be able to turn on a tiered functionality is not something that's always easy or really cheap to do. So some of these policies live on from legacy systems and will eventually mature up to a more standard pricing scheme that fits for the full region. And these are all signed really clearly. That on facility messaging I talked about earlier with pricing, people know typically based on, they can cut $1.50 and know it's going to be 50 cents, right? That wraps us up for the informational piece. As I mentioned, the timeline to come back, toll exemptions, we will come back to you in June, it's right around the corner. As far as discounts and the things that we've talked about the operational administrative cost burden, the potential erosion of toll revenue and all of those things, staff feels that we really need to make sure that we are arming you with data to have that informed decision. So the information from the TNR study, some analysis and assessment of understanding the outcomes of those kinds of decisions is something that we'll be bringing back in August, so we can pair that up nicely for some recommendations for you.
So a question on that, if I could. So help me understand, as we contemplate, exemptions and discounts in going forward, because we all know that once you've granted something, it's really hard to pull it back, really hard, if not impossible in most cases. So we are building this thing as we're going, but we're gonna create a system that has discounts and exemptions before we know the full extent of the budget, right? So we're gonna have to move incrementally, I would imagine. Help me understand, how do you predetermine who gets a discount and to what degree the discount continues to grow when you haven't fully understood the baseline absolute black and white operational costs that are required as part of the operations? How do you understand that a little bit better?
Well, first, so a lot of agencies struggle with this, and some agencies take a very conservative stance and do not give any discounts at all until they know that they can afford it, because there's a lot of these projects in the US that have loans and debt service that they are obligated to do. And if a lender comes in and says, you're going to discount all these people, how soon am I going to get paid back? That can compromise your fiscal stability and your financial obligations. So that's one way of doing it. We do use forecasting for agencies that have requirements to have HOV discounts, for example, or in the case of San Mateo, that had a very elected official forward equity program that baked it into the loan as an earmark for that they said, we're going to use this much to do this the way we want to do it. So I think there's a number of models that you could follow, Chair, and I think that's what the recommendation will be, we don't have a crystal ball, but we will have some data to be able to forecast and give some ballparks, and then we'll look to the board to tell us how conservative or aggressive to be with those various types of discounts.
Well, I would just throw out, and I want to hear what others are thinking so that staff kind of knows how to frame this, but it would seem to me that we would be probably best suited if we were thinking about categories rather than specifics in terms of amounts until we know what the budget is, and then kind of move forward in that way rather than trying to reverse engineer this thing where we've already sort of determined where those discounts, reductions might be, and then we've got to figure out how to reverse engineer the budget. I just want to be super careful as we move forward that we're fully transparent around the extent to which the actual objectives of this operation are meeting their obligations, especially if we're contemplating using, a range of different funding sources. We want to be very thoughtful around it.
helpful feedback.
I'll just chime in, just reiterate, I appreciate your thinking and perspective on this, and I would agree with it, and I would just offer in a little stronger language. I don't think you ever take back a discount or an exemption. I think once you've committed to it, you've publicly committed to it, you will live for the life cycle of it. You know, if we think about these projects as having a 30 or 50-year life cycle, I would very much favor the incremental approach. We can do the forecasting to get a good sense and scale of what different discounts do based on industry standards, but nothing beats getting into ongoing operations and collecting real data. And there's nothing bad about collecting real data for a year or two, because there will be a ramp up period, there'll be a learning period, there will be fast track tag penetration, there'll be all of those things where after you have that, you can maybe open up and expand the discounts and or exemptions you offer as part of the value proposition of the corridor. But to do it, yeah, based on forecasts or other things, I think wouldn't be fiscally prudent.
Okay, any other thoughts on that?
Did you?
Wait, jump in.
I was gonna say the same thing.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple quick things. I totally agree. I think that's a great point. Having some kind of bands or buckets, if you will, around what that looks like as we move forward will be important. And if it's my understanding, Kathleen, whoever, like in the EIR, it's laid out that we're mandated for HOV discounts, but not equity. Is that correct?
So yeah, so the project was environmentally cleared as an HOV 3+ lane, which would be 3+ is free. So that's the commitment the EIR has made. I have no intention of recommending going against that. That would cause a whole bunch of headaches. So I think at minimum, the action you're looking at in August is to confirm that CARTA is going to do what the EIR said we were going to do with
Right.
regards to HOV. And then the discussion you're having is really helpful to us to understand, like, which other buckets could we put to bed a little bit? And which other buckets do you want us to keep an eye on and come back to you in ramp up or as we know the picture better?
Got it. Yeah, it was just for consideration on the first one on there, it's HOV, which we have to do, right? So we know going into August or July that we know the bare minimum is 3+, right? Okay. And then I think the other piece too is around equity programs, is like, I mean, if it's, do they have to be run through CARTA? Like YOLO TD could run an equity program, right? Or provide incentives to give out bus passes for people to do the bus as part of an equity program, right? It doesn't all have to be fed through the tolling agency. Is that correct?
That's correct. The board can sort of set it up how it wants to. And so I think there's two pieces I want to kind of nuance there, which is CARTA administered programs versus CARTA determined programs, right? So CARTA can make a regional decision that, let's say, we want to give out transit passes, and then CARTA gives funding to the transit operators to functionally administer that because they're best suited to do that, but still making a regional decision. Conversely, we could also have corridor specific equity decisions, but my concern is that gets away from some of the regional coordination and economies of scale that we intended when we built CARTA, right? So some of this is what we all still need to work out together as we deliver all this.
Yeah, I think that was part of my concern. There were some of us that were in a meeting last night at YTD on a fiscal budget workshop, and Chad Edison from CalSTA was there, and he was talking about the task force, the California Transit Transformation Task Force that he's on right now. And what they were specifically talking about was how to get rid of the barriers to these types of programs like what we were describing. So initially my thought on it run through CARTA and the work that takes and the percentage that takes off, like that 7 to 10%, right? Where if it's just a low barrier entry of, like he was saying, they do $1,000, businesses get $1,000 tax write-off to provide $1,000 in transportation dollars to their employees, right? And it's kind of fed through and paid off that way, where you're not going through all these different types of hoops to get it set up and creating more barriers for people to use it. So I think just being mindful of that as we process through this, if we are going to do that, that it should be some sort of, piece that kind of maybe goes back to the different transit organizations to use those dollars for programs that they think best fit. And then as more people come on, that same thing happens. Thanks.
And then if I could just ask, and Jefferson,
Go ahead.
and then how does this align with, or I'm assuming it's a significant part of the conversation that will result as part of the equity study? And that's coming online, assuming as you mentioned earlier, grant funding, all the other efforts there.
Yep, so if CARTA is successful in its Caltrans planning grant, we should get into contracting with Caltrans to be able to get that money flowing. Hopefully put it out to procurement, maybe get a consultant on board to start in January of 2026. And so then we'll do the work of hopefully focus groups, talking to actual people on what kind of benefits they'd want to see. So we're building a program that makes sense for the whole system. But there's some of these early decisions that we need to know, like who HOV3+. We need to make sure we have the right equipment in place and the right contract. So we have to iteratively visit and revisit some of these decisions. And so the hope with the August action we're bringing before you on discounts is that you'll tell us, there's ones we have to do for the environmental document, of course. And then these are the ones we're still interested in. And this is the path we want staff to use to look into these discounts. And these are the ones we're not as interested in and we don't need to keep exploring.
So I think for August is part of the conversation. So there's this one thing and there's all these other things. The one thing is if this is not hot 3, that's a big problem because that was a commitment inside of a document, right? So I don't want to prejudge what the board's going to do, but that's a thing. And then there's everything else. And just because we're going to have hot 3 equals free, because that was in the environmental document, that doesn't necessarily then mean hot 2 is 50% off, right?
Correct.
Right. So whether hot 2 is also 50 or hot 2 is 100% off or hot 2 is the same as a single occupant vehicle, the board has full discretion all over those decisions, right? And I think it would be helpful when you come back in August and we see that data. I would love to see the data in the sense that hot 2 plus at 50% equals $75 million of lost revenue over the 30-year period of the project. So I think the same sort of revenue terms that you talk about, and you should bring that same, whatever that scale is, relative to the exemptions and discounts, so the board can fully appreciate the revenue impacts of the decisions that's going to be before them in August.
That's very helpful direction. Part of why we delayed the decision to August is because we'll have the traffic and revenue analysis ready to be able to say, under these different policy conditions, this is what we anticipate a guesstimate of revenue will be.
Yeah, and to add to that, another reason is, if I understand the whole loan with the infrastructure bank, or where we're going to be looking at for another loan, if we just throwing that out, that if we were to move forward in August or soon thereafter with identifying discounts, that would potentially be somewhat of a detriment in regards to the financial viability of the revenues that we're going to get, because now we have locked in, we would have, frankly, which would not be a good decision, those discounts. So just another data point as to why we don't want to do that. And just to, so that's one point. The other one that I want to make is just to, back to what Kathleen was saying about the environmental document, the commitments that were made. Appreciate that, and just to continue to thank you, Kathleen, for that, and to make sure that we as a board are reminded as to what those commitments were. There's a lot of areas, like you just mentioned, Matt, where we're not tied in, like HOV 2+, totally up for discussion, but HOV hot 3+, that was an environmental commitment. I mean, could the board override that? Absolutely. But now we would be in a world of hurt. Let's put it that way. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Right. Anybody else? If not, then we'll take some public comment. I have one slip, and that's from Autumn Bernstein. Welcome.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't planning to speak, but I wanted to jump in on a couple things because really great conversation and important points. So I just wanted to underscore something that I think is really key when we're talking about a lot of these discounts. Like HOV, we need to do that. We need to do HOV 3+. When we think about equity, there's a lot of complexity there, and I would encourage you to kind of separate out equity from this conversation and maybe not move forward as quickly with that, in part because, as you mentioned, there is going to be an equity study. And I've actually, when I was a consultant, I worked on an equity study for a toll lane in San Mateo. And one of the things I learned through that project is that there's a lot of different things that equity can look like, and it means different things. And it really is very context specific to the communities that you're really working to serve. And if we think about the communities along this corridor, for example, in West Sacramento, some of the neighborhoods there, understanding, do those folks need to use the lane? Is that really a priority? Or do they need better transit service? Do they need traffic calming? Do they need, bicycle and pedestrian connectivity? So I think there's a lot of different ways to do equity that CARTA can do equity. aside from just doing discounted tolls. And so I would encourage you to, even though we need to move forward with some of these other decisions around HOV and motorcycles, because we have to do that for all the reasons that Kathleen's already stated, take the time to have the conversation around equity and to really do the community engagement. We're already starting to do some of that locally for Yolo County in particular. And, hopefully with the grant from Caltrans, we'll be able to do it for the entire CARTA region. So I would just encourage the board to kind of put that in a separate bucket for now.
Thank you, Autumn. Any other slips to speak?
There's no other public comment.
Thank you. All right, this was just a workshop, so if there are no other thoughts or comments, thank you very much. Very, very helpful. Look forward to the next meeting. All right, then that takes us to item 5 is receive and file the fiscal year 24-25 quarterly financial report. No staff comments, we're good? Good on that? So let's receive and file. All right, are there any other matters by members of the body? None, then with no other questions, that finalize the formal agenda. We are adjourned. Thank you very much. Yeah, let's go.